This survey was happening after the American Revolution was over, and the government basically wanted people to come and settle in Canada. If you were willing to sign a pledge of loyalty to the Crown, they didn't care if you were from the United States, Ireland, Scotland, wherever you were from. If you were willing to come here and settle, they would give you land. And he realized that his family could truly benefit from some choice pieces of land. So he's going to ensure that his family not only get land, but get land with water, because he's done the surveys. So part of what he surveyed was Stoney Township, which is now better known as Stoney Creek. And there are three members of the Jones family. So first person is Mary Jones, but she was known as Polly, and she is the grandmother for the family of Stoney Creek. And she married a man named James Gage. So we have Mary and James Gage. Her sister Susanna married William Gage. So two brothers married two sisters. And then of course the brother Augustus is the person who is surveying Southern Ontario. And he gets almost at the same time. And so both of his Indigenous wives chose the Christian name of Sarah. So he had for any European to show up. And so Sarah, number one, wanted to stay with her people, and her son Peter Jones is actually born on Rowan Plains. More about that as we get to it. So, since you're going to be looking at this later, I put extra information which you can just read, but it's background, it's not going to be talking a lot. But this is the big breakdown of who his two wives were and their connection and the children they had. So, land grants is the reason that the Jones family and the Gage families are coming to Upper Canada. And James and William Gage, Irish, born in County Derry in the 1740s, and they came to the United States of America. It wasn't called United States of America yet. So they arrived here approximately in the early 1760s, and again, they're coming for land. So they have from Ireland to America, and they settle on the Hudson River near Greenbush, and when the American Revolution starts, they join up in the 2nd Ulster County Regiment, the New York Militia. So they are fighting for the American patriot cause. They are not loyalists in any way. They have not even been in Canada yet. They're fighting for the right to own land and not be subject to the British Crown, because even back then, the Irish were not fond of the British rule anyway. So they're in the right country for that, as far as they're concerned. Sadly, the older brother James was bayoneted at Battle of Clinton on October 6, 1777, leaving behind a wife and a 3-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter. So now Mary Gage is a widow, but her sister Susanna Williams survives the war of the American Revolution. And Mary Gage will get 7 years, a half pay as a widow's rights. When this half pay is up, she doesn't really have a lot of money, and during this time, Augustus has gone to Canada to survey Southern Ontario. So Mary Gage, you're willing to sign that pledge to be loyal to the Crown, you get your land. And so this is it's in the collection. There's Mary Gage's land grant. Sadly, the part where she actually puts the X or her name is part where it's not, but she could not read or write, so she made her mark, she made her X. And so that is in the Battlefield House collection. And she's come up here, and now she has land for her family to thrive. And they start off in, everyone does, a log cabin. And when you go to Battle House Museum today, each level of the house, the higher up you go, the younger the house gets. So they start off, James and Elizabeth are in their teens, but on the plot next to them is William and Susanna with their children, and of course Augustus, other members are there, and so they all help each other build their log cabins. So under the log cabin was a root cellar, and so they built their first log cabin in 1789. And so the oldest part of the house is the root cellar in the basement. It's a 1789 structure. And This is a map showing some of the land being divided up, and I'm just going to turn the map sideways so you can see it better. And notice, so we got Augustus and his father get some lots of land. Look how much land William Gage is getting. Mary and her son James are all each given plots of land, and Stephen Jones, another one of their brothers, gets land too. And so they got some choice pieces of land with water running through thanks to Augustus' survey. And so the Joneses and the Gages are established in Saltfleet. But here's how much land they got. It wasn't just a couple of acres. As you can see, Ebenezer, Augustus' father, gets 1,400 acres of land. And Augustus is doing so bad himself with 500. But I'm also showing some of the Davis family because Mary Gage's son James is going to marry the Davis family, and the Davises are also getting acres. So just this family connected to each other, look how much land they have acquired. And it's not a small amount. Now, the Davises were loyalists. When the American Revolution broke out, the Davis family supported the king. And British troops fighting the Patriots stopped at the Davis plantation and were treated kindly, fed, given supplies, given food, horses were watered, and so on. But all the American patriots were like, oh, well, clearly this family doesn't want to be part of the United States. So the American army, after the British army left the Davis land, the American army showed up and ransacked it and took everything. And let the Davis family know that they had a short amount of time to get out of the country before the house would be set on fire. So the Davis family, they realized they are going to leave. They have to leave. They're not welcome if they're going to support the crown. They have to go to Canada. And so they had this many children, and please notice that Mary Jane Davis was 16 when they arrived in Canada. She's going to marry James. But she had a brother named Asahel and a sister named Keziah, and another one named Sarah. And these names keep appearing over and over and over again in the Gage family. Everyone has children and name them after their brothers, sisters, and aunts and uncles. So the same names keep repeating all the time. But William's wife, Hannah, while she does make it to Canada, she doesn't make it to Saltfleet. She dies in Chippewa. So William Davis will arrive in Saltfleet as a widower with his children, ranging the age from 21-year-old Elizabeth down to 4-year-old Sarah. And the Davis family brought North Carolina fruit, seeds and trees. So they are one of the reasons why Southerners now it's a fruit belt. They brought some of the earliest, so as you can see, apple orchards, pear orchards, and so on. So they brought these trees with them, trees and seeds, and that's where it started from. And this is a painting of the Davis home, and please just notice the architecture with the light front porch. It's 2 stories, and I'll provide this picture again later how much it does look like what Battle of Stoney turns out into. So this is a painting done many years later, but this is they call their home, the Davis family call their house Harmony Hall. It was in Metal. Now, the painting actually, oddly enough, this painting is not in the Battle of Stoney collection, it's in the Whitehorn collection. Thomas Baker McQuestion in the 1920s, 30s was trying to save Canada from the Great Depression, and he was getting museums, forts restored, and trying to get tourists to come here, and he was very passionate about history, and so someone gave him this painting of Harmony Hall with an explanation of it on the back. And this explanation talks about what it actually looked like and how they actually had peacocks floating the grounds, but it also mentions that they had slave cabins. So the Davis family came up from the States with slaves. And this is what Harmony Hall looked like in the 1970s. It is not there today. Progress, we want to call it progress, had the home demolished to make way for other things. So that's the last of the descendants in front of the home before it was sold and then demolished. So there are 3 branches on the Gage family tree, and so Mary, the widow, came up with a son James and a daughter Elizabeth, and we're going to start with Elizabeth branch because she's part of the story anyway. So she will be courted and will marry John Westbrook of Ancaster. And just like the Gages were getting lots of land in Salt Lake, up at Ancaster, there were land grants as well too, and John Westbrook got lot 43 in Section 2. And so they lived in Ancaster, but after the war was over, they will eventually end up in Brantford. And again, this is the part. When John was a little boy of 6 and his brother Alexander, they were sent in the woods to street cattle, and they were captured by green-headed bulldogs and taken back to the States for a while. And their parents thought they were lost forever, but they eventually are released and returned back to their family. So John Westbrook had actually became friends with some of them. So they had Indigenous friends in their circle, and they also knew Joseph Brant. So this is a short version of it. How John and Alexander are captured, and then they're eventually ransomed back to their family. So Joseph Brant is the reason they got returned. So there's a connection. And by the way, one of the two Sarahs, her brother is Joseph Brant. So Augustus Jones's brother-in-law is Brant. So they're all connecting in various different ways. So John Westbrook marries in the year 1796 Elizabeth Gage, and they become the parents of 16 children, 9 daughters and 7 sons. Just a tiny little family. And I was saying here that James Gage married Mary Davis. So James and Elizabeth Gage both get married the same year. We don't, unfortunately, it's not recorded in any family Bible and records what date they got married on. But quite often, we think that they probably just thought it was smart to have a double wedding ceremony. But we have no proof of that whatsoever. All we know is they both brother and sister got married in that particular year. And John and Elizabeth, those 16 children, produced a total of 94 grandchildren. So, my little joke is that Elizabeth Gage, after she became a criminal mentor, she wrote a little poem called, I have 94 grandchildren, Christmas is canceled. Can you imagine? 94 grandchildren. Now, sadly, after her first children, they had a child named John who lived to be less than a year old. And a few children later, they tried again, and again, he lived to be less than a year old. So, naming their son John was not, but they did try for a third time. So, of the 16 children, 14 grew up. So, it's 14 children that produced 94 grandchildren. And this is Elizabeth Gage at the age of 81. And this is the early stages of photography. And she's got a remarkable bone structure, and for someone who's in her 80s, she's lived a long life. She's not smiling because it's most likely that she doesn't have her main teeth left. But that's a surviving image of Elizabeth, who mother 16, grandmother 94. If she's tired, she deserves a little tired. So she and her husband John are raising a family in Ancaster, and later on they moved again, but they are now adjacent to the story of the Battle of Stoney Creek. She's a part of the family, and again, she names some of her children's names, again, belong with the family already. So, in 1796, James Gage, age 22, marries Mary Jane Davis, age 19, and they have 10 children. So, Mary was a slacker, not like her sister Elizabeth. Mary gave up after 10. But they have 10 children who produce 50 grandchildren, 25 boys and 25 girls. But for the Battle of Stoney Creek, there are only 8 children born. So we have the oldest will be a 15-year-old down to a little girl Mary who's less than a year old when the battle happened. So when you think of the Battle of Stoney Creek, it's James and Mary and his mother Mary and 8 children aged 15 to age 1. Later on, 2 more children were born, and that child is really important to analyze the age because she's the mother of Sarah Calder, who will get the monument built. But these 2 have no memories of the war because they weren't around. But by the time the last one's born, the oldest is having a child, so she's becoming she's a grandmother, and she's also still having children. Poor Mary. So this is so here are the 8 children and Mary and James. Now, We have actual paintings of James and Mary, and because we also talk to the school children, it's hard to explain to a kindergartner, grade 3 or grade 5. It's hard for them to just imagine pictures. So we've chosen images that are not there. This is our image of the grandmother Mary Gage, the widow Mary Gage. These are were photoshopped to look younger than the paintings of them, which will be later. But these other children are just images that we chose them that they look like they can be related to each other. So when you tell to a kindergarten class about here's a mom and a dad and grandma, let's kind of how many children they have, how many boys, how many girls. When they see a picture, they remember it better. So I just want to be clear that only the images of James and Mary are accurate. Everything else is just artistic license. But again, this is the family that will be living in the house when the Battle of Stoney Creek happens. Now, interestingly, Augustus Jones with his 2 wives, his first wife Sarah, who doesn't stay with him, she's having children at the same time that Mary Gage having children. So his oldest son John and Asahel are just 2 months apart, and his next son Peter and James Gage's son Andrew are 2 months apart. So these children, the Gage family, knew their indigenous cousins because they were all the same age. At one point, Augustus Jones takes his children from Sarah number 1. He wants to make sure they have schooling, so he brings them to Stoney Creek so they can go to school and learn English, learn how to read and write. So the Gage's children definitely knew their cousins. And so his other children, Augustus Jones, with Sarah number 2, are these children who are all given Christian names. Now, we're reading, because the Battle of Stoney Creek technically happens on a Sunday, it was 2 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, June the 6th. So it happened on a Sunday. And of all the days to have a battle, Sunday's the worst day because, of course, that's supposed to be the day of rest, the day of Sabbath, going to church. And if you know, back then, on Sunday, it was a quiet day, a day for religious observance, but it wasn't a day for frivolity. And if you were a child, you're not allowed to read picture books or any kind of novel. If you're old enough to read, you can read the Bible. You can't play with toys or run around and be silly. You must sit quietly and think about the lesson learned in church. Unless you've been very lucky for your birthday or Christmas, you've been given a Sunday toy. And a Sunday toy is a toy that for the rest of the week is up on a shelf and is brought down on Sunday afternoons. So a Sunday toy could be a jigsaw puzzle that features biblical scenes, building blocks that put together to build a church, or a Noah's Ark. And if you're playing with that toy, you're thinking of a Bible story, and it's appropriate. The rest of the week, that toy is put up on a shelf. So the Gage children would have had Sunday toys, because they definitely would have been observing church. They were Methodists, they definitely would have gone to church, but lucky children for Christmas or the rest of them get a Sunday toy, and that made Sunday just a little bit better for if you were 3 or 4 or 5 and hard to sit still. So in Battle of today, you can see this Noah's Ark on the floor by Old Children's bed. So all toys, of course, handmade, carved out of wood. Now, fire is a big deal. There's an expression, fire makes a good servant but a poor master. In other words, never let fire get out of control. The number 1 accident that will lead to women in your family dying is hearth death, having your clothes catch on fire. You cook by a fire, you make candles by a fire, you make soap by a fire, you get water to wash by a fire. Almost everything except for spinning on a spinning wheel, every chore a woman does involves being next to a fire. And if you're by a fire all day long, that cloth of your dress is bone dry, and if you turn your back to the fire and not watching, a spark will get out of your dress and flare up very quickly. And so you always have a jug of water, a bucket of water near the fire for such an accident. And they did not know about, there was not very many remedies for a bad burn, unless you happen to know about aloe vera. The only thing you do is rub cold butter onto your burn. So you have butter stored in a crock in your root cellar, it's cold, and that cold butter rubbed on your burn felt very soothing to your burnt skin. But on pasteurized milk, churning the butter rubbed onto a burn is going to cause an infection. So you didn't die from the burns, you died from the infection. So fire is terrifying. You need fire to cook and be warm, but fire can also be frightening. And when the Battle of Stoney Creek begins, most of them are locked up in the root cellar of their own house, hearing cannon going off all around them. and their biggest fear that whole night was that a cannonball might accidentally hit the house in the chimney and have the house catch on fire, and they'd all be trapped inside. So that was a night of terror for the Gages, not knowing what was happening and would the house catch on fire while they were locked in it. So school programs, lots of fire. This fire is a little bit more sure than it needs to be, but up until recently, we had, in the bathhouse, we still had working fires, but during COVID, they inspected the chimneys, and there's enough bricks that are not secured and plastered. We don't want the dangerous spark from the chimney and landing in plaster, so we no longer have fires in the kitchen, because we don't want the house to burn down. So we do other activities that we still talk to children about school programs about fire and cooking and things like that. But these are taken when we actually still had fires in hearth. And that, oops, it's very dark, I don't know why, but anyway, that is a jug of water by the fire. And the Gages were staunch Methodists. Reverend William Case had come through Upper Canada converting everyone to Methodism, and they were staunch Methodists and always had church. In fact, Andrew Gage, the second oldest boy, he named his firstborn child William Case Gage. So that's how much they were in the being Methodist. And Stoney Creek did have a chapel. There was a little church near the Gage home. This is an image of the parlor today, and now, I need a little survey. How many of you prefer coffee over tea? Raise your hands if you're a coffee drinker. How many of you prefer tea over coffee? Okay, I'm on the tea side. I'm going to tell you a little fact about coffee and tea. So these are called sugar snips, and sugar came in a cone, and it was hard as a rock, and you use your scissors. Sugar snips had scissors, and you would cut little pieces of sugar into small pieces called lumps, and you would have a little sugar bowl full of literally lumps of tea. And so when you took the lump of sugar, it was still so hard that if you dropped your teacup, by the time it dissolved, the tea was cold. So you would put the tea between your teeth, lump of sugar between your teeth, and sip the tea through the lump to get the sweet taste. And so tea and coffee had very different connotations. Back in London, coffee houses were opening up all over the city and other countries too, and university students realized pretty quickly that if you drink coffee, you can stay awake longer. It keeps you alert. And so after university classes are over, they would take themselves to a coffee house, have some coffee, and discuss things. And it became known that if you wanted a very intellectual conversation, you took yourself to a coffee house, and you talk to university students about philosophy or medicine or history or whatever you read, literature. And whereas tea, servants in fancy rich households had a nickname for tea. They called it scandal broth, because when the ladies were having tea in the parlor, they were having tea saying, "Did you hear? Did you hear what that person did? So-and-so said this." They were giving the latest gossip. So it boils down to, if you're a coffee drinker, you'd be considered intellectual. And if you're a tea drinker, you're a gossip. I'm on team gossip. So. Now, that's really, so coffee bean, and by the way, when you got your tea, it came in these tea blocks, and a tea brick, and it was, so if you couldn't afford to buy a whole brick of tea, you could cut off one, the sort of people could snip off one block of tea, and the block could be rubbed against the grater for it to flake off, and you put those flakes of tea, grated tea, into your teapot. And again, the coffee grinder grabbed coffee beans. So here's the Gage parlor set for tea. So remember, they were not planning on their farm ever becoming a battlefield. James had built a storage property, they were becoming prosperous, they had lots of cleared land. So for the Gages, they knew that a war had started, but they never crossed their minds that their farm was going to be a battlefield. And so it's like spinning. The only activity for a woman that doesn't involve sitting by the fire is spinning on a wheel or using aluminum. And carding wool, and they made their own bed linens, they made their own curtains, they made their own carpets. So when the battle happens, all their linens are being torn up as bandages. So the weeks and months of work that those women put to create a pleasant home, that's part of their war loss claims, all the linens and all the fabric that was torn up. Now, the oldest daughter's name was Catherine Gage, and that's the sample hanging on the wall right there. And she completed it in 1816. But Sampler said two things about you as a female, hoping to get married one day. It showed a fine hand with stitching. It also showed that you were literate, because not everyone was given the opportunity to read and write. So a great example showed two things: how fine of a hand you had, and that you could read and write. And these are other examples of embroidery. Now, other parts of the house. Now, this is my little tiny rant before we get to the actual battle. There's a rumor that never goes away that the ghost of Mary Gage is wandering out of the house looking for her stolen teapot. And what happened was, in the late 1980s, a cast iron teapot that never belonged to the Gages but was donated because it was period appropriate. The cleaner thought it looked better in the room next to it, and she moved the teapot to the room next door. And for about 10 days, everyone thought that someone managed to steal the teapot on tour. And then the cleaner said, "Oh no," she said, "Oh no, it's not stolen. I just put it over here." And then they put it back on the mantle. But there's this huge myth that an American soldier stole Mary's teapot, and she's been bothered by it ever since. The only problem with that is there are three Mary Gages: grandmother Mary Gage, James's wife, Mrs. Mary Gage, and a daughter named Mary Gage, who was only one when the battle happened. But when in 1835, James Gage, who's now so prosperous, they sell their home and move to downtown Hamilton to a fine brick home. And his mother, still alive, his wife, and his daughter, now a grown-up young lady, all moved to Hamilton, and they all died in Hamilton. And so why did one of their ghosts hitchhike down to Stoney Creek in the 1990s to look for a teapot that wasn't theirs? So we still have everyone say, "Oh yeah, she's so upset. Which Mary Gage is upset?" Because they didn't belong to any of the Mary Gages. So if you're hearing anyone saying, "Look, the ghost of Mary Gage is really mad about her teapot," she's not really mad. The teapot is back on the mantle where it belongs. And Mary you don't want Mary coming after you for spreading that rumor about her. She's fine. She's not upset about a teapot. So now we get to the battle. The Americans are advancing, and they want to control one end of Lake Ontario. So on August 27, 1813, they captured Fort York. And if you can think of one end of Lake Ontario that has a triangle, you need 3 points. So August 27, 1813, they captured Fort York. Exactly 1 month later, May 27, 1813, they captured Fort George. And the shelling is so bad, the fort is literally knocked to the ground. There's nothing left of the fort. And all the soldiers from Fort George put it up to Burlington Heights and reestablished command. But Burlington Heights does not have a fort, and they don't have time to build a fort because the American army is on their way. But they need to capture Burlington Heights, and they have basically this Burlington Heights is in Hamilton. If you have Hamilton, Toronto, Niagara Falls, you have control one end of the lake. So the American army has got 2 of the 3 points they need, and they need to capture Burlington Heights. So there's no surprise. The British Army knows exactly what's going to happen. The Americans are going to come this way. And Burlington Heights, let's say for almost 10,000 years, it was indigenous people coming here for the summer hunting grounds and for fishing. And then Richard Beasley gets a land grant, and he builds a brick house and a barn and plants an orchard, and he has a store near the edge of the water selling trading goods. So Richard Beasley had a brick house, 1.5-story house with wings in the end, a separate ice house, but it was a very nice house. And when the army comes to Burlington Heights, they kick him off his land, saying, this is going to be quite a mess. From this high piece of land overlooking the waters, we can see American ships approaching, and we know that men are coming this way. So you have no choice. You're getting kicked off. And so they put all the officers' quarters are put. The Beasley House becomes headquarters for the officers, and they begin digging giant hills of dirt. Giant hills of dirt. If you're running across a flat land towards your enemy, that's a pretty fast run. But if you have to run and go down a ditch, then up a hill where there's a big fence, and they're shooting to the fence, and go down that hill, and then run and go up that hill. There were 3 lines of defense where you actually reach the soldiers. So they dig up Richard Bees's property and transform it into a place to defend. And they build things like a gunpowder magazine, and under one of those hills, they have a sally port that you get from one side to the other. And so there's the house, and there's a big this picture is different, but it's a huge hill with a palisade top, and under that hill is a tunnel leading to the gunpowder magazine. And if you go to Dunker Castle today, the tunnel that goes down to the laundry, that's the sally port going to the gunpowder magazine. So part of Dunker Castle is 1790, Richard Details kind of go back, because when McNabb buys the land, he says to the architect, it's a perfectly good house, not even that old. Don't tear it down, build around it. So the architect has these parts torn off. So what is today Dunker Castle's front hallway and dining room, that's Richard Bees's house. And so the architect has parts on both ends and connects the separate heights house next to it to the basement, and he makes the whole thing. So Dunker Castle is 3 periods. It is part of the house is 1790 Richard Beasley, part of the house is War of 1812, and part of the house is 1835 when the house is completed. So Dunker Castle is a mixture of everything. So the British Army they know that attacks are going to happen, and on Saturday, June the 5th, the American Army on the march coming up from Niagara have reached the farm of James and Mary Gage as the sun's going down. Hamilton doesn't exist, there's nothing in Hamilton. Stoney Creek is a private community, so is Waterdown, I don't know about it, unfortunately, I'll show that, but Ancaster's driving, so is Dundas. They're all established, but what we now call Hamilton is basically forests and swamps with the occasional farm. So when the Americans reach James and Mary's farm, the sun's going down. And by the way, there's 3,500 of them. And so it's not just their farm, William Gage's farm. The farms all around are all taken over by this army who's been walking all day and they're tired and hungry. And so they set up camp and they ransack the farm. Remember Mary Gage when she was 16 years old? She's on a property in the United States, and the American Army ransacked the property, take everything. She's like, oh, deja vu, it's happening again. She's now living, most people never have it happen once, she's having it happen for the second time. So they lock the family in the root cellar, and they proceed to slaughter livestock, pull down the drawer, cook meat, take all the food they can out of the root cellar, because they're very hungry people. And the other farms around that farm are also equally getting foodstuffs and things taken from them. So the American Army are settling for the night because they're not going to walk through forests and swamps in the dark. And the British Army had scouts, and so the British Army knew that they were here. And a local person named Billy Green also, he made his way up to Burlington Heights to tell the British Army what was happening. When he got there, they already knew, but he's a part of the story that he went up and he marched back with them. Now, when you load and fire a musket, it takes 20 seconds to load and fire a musket to shoot once, and it only shoots the length of a football field. If you're firing at a football field, you're not going to hit what you're aiming at. And firing at night, no one has a battle length because you can't see where you're aiming at. So the American Army has settled down knowing that they're going to rest up all night, and they're going to march up in the morning. They're going to march up in the nights. And what we find out much later in history is that someone named Aaron Stevens, who was a British, worked for the British Army, he was actually a spy, and he will get executed for it later on in the bloody sizes of Ancaster. He was a spy. He'd gone around all the British fortifications, and he made detailed notes of where the guns, where the cannon were, where the gunpowder was stored, how many men were, or the weakest parts. So the American Army had in their hands everything they needed to capture Burlington Heights, plus the sheer number of men. So had they been able to sleep all night, get up in the morning, and get up at Burlington Heights, they would have won because they had the information and the men needed to win that battle. So the British Army decided that they're going to do something a little unusual. They're going to have a surprise attack at night. And so they asked the men to volunteer. There's approximately 1,500 soldiers up in Burlington Heights, and there's 3,500 down in Stoney Creek. And the men are asked to volunteer for forlorn hope. What a forlorn hope means is you're probably going to get captured or die, but we need you to slow them down. We need to shake up their morale. We need to give us more time to prepare for when they get here. We just need you to slow them down. So 750 men volunteer for the formal, so they send down half their men, who then spend, they leave 11 o'clock at night and arrive at 2 o'clock in the morning. So a 3-hour march through, remember it's June, so lots of black flies and mosquitoes. It's been raining, it's all moppy and swampy. And when they get to the edge of the clearing where the soldiers are, if you've ever done camping, you know that when you sit by a campfire and look out, all you can see is total darkness. If you step away from the fire and get something, you can look back and see your friends sitting by the campfire. You can see them all very clearly. So the British Army reach where the soldiers are camped, and there's hundreds of cooking fires. Remember, 3,100 men. They can see the Americans, who are mostly all asleep, but the Americans looking up at darkness can't see anything. And so that was their chance of a surprise. They will attack at night, which no one does. And in this group of probably 700 men, there were, one American says 10, and American says 12. There were 12 indigenous men. And the commander said, we are not discounting your bravery, but you're a small group of men, and we would like to use you more effectively. So we asked the indigenous people to circle the forest around the clearing and make war cries, and knowing that would keep the Americans from trying to escape and run in the woods, because they, as frightened as might be of the army shooting at them, they're more frightened of what might happen to them in the woods. So the indigenous people circled the clearings, making war cries, and every American soldier stayed where they were on the open grounds. So they open fire. Now this is a map drawn from the time, and you can see part of it shows the Gage house and part of it. But remember, the Gage house, there's also a wing, there's other houses all the way around. All the other houses are long gone, so the Gage family house is the last remnant of that big battle. And so this is it's a backstory of the Gage family. They had probably close to 60 acres of cleared land, cultivated land, and by 1890 they have 70. So it's a farm, a barn, hay houses, other outbuildings, a big root cellar, and in 1796, when James married Mary, he knew that a one-room log cabin with his wife and her mother-in-law would not be a smart idea. So they left the root cellar of the log cabin alone, and they built a 1.5-story house. So the main floor, if you go to Battle House, is from 1796, the year they got married. So the root cellar is 1789, the main floor is 1796, and the second floor is added in 1835. When they sold the property, the next person who bought it added the second floor and built on a ballroom because they wanted to turn the building into an inn. So, but if you are thinking of the house through Battle of Stoney Creek, it's a 1.5-story home, sloped roof. So this is not theirs, but this is I found a picture that, except for having this winter, it gives you an idea of the home that it would look. And again, from another, so this is the way the house would look. A 1.5-story house built in 1796, and under that house is the root cellar where the family had been locked up. Remember, this battle happens at night. Now, Brigadier General John Vincent was the commander of Fort George. So when the Americans' guns smashed Fort Stoney Creek, he's the man in charge of all the soldiers who've now relocated to Rolling Heights. He's the top commander, but I'm not going to talk about him. And here's some other people who are famous and have Colonel John Harvey, Major Charles Plenderleaf, Lieutenant James Fitzgibbon. They're all great. Not saying anything, nothing to say about them, but they all get really recognized for being the commanders who helped turn the tide and win the battle. But this is the person who, in my opinion, goes really unrecognized. It's Captain Alexander Fraser. He's in the 49th Foot Regiment. So when the battle starts and firing on both sides, as you get closer, you're getting within firing range. And Smith's Knoll, if you've ever been to Stoney Creek, Smith's Knoll is where the monument is now, where all the dead are buried. That was permanent. There's no roads. That was just a hill, and the American cannon, guns, were there. And once they got so far onto the land, they were going to be within fire range of the cannon, and they know how long time it takes to load a cannon. You fire, and then to reload, and then fire. So they got to almost just out of fire range, and they waited, and they knew in order to win the battle, they had to capture and they captured the American guns. So when the last blast almost got to them, they then charged the hill, and Alexander, who was 23, and his brother Peter was 19, were among the small group men who captured the guns. So, and after the guns are captured, the Americans were thinking, we're outnumbered. They weren't. We're losing the battle badly. They weren't. There were actually more British dead lying on the ground than there were Americans. We're surrounded by British warriors. They weren't. Our guns are gone. Let's get out of here. And the American army retreated. But in the confusion, Brigadier General Winder and Brigadier General John Chandler were captured 10 minutes apart by Alexander Fraser. In less than 10 minutes from the time the cannons were seized, he then captures 2 generals. And he gets a promotion, and his commanding officers get a huge promotion. But he did all the work. So he's the person that should be a soda. If he hadn't captured the guns with his brother and then captured the generals, no history record ever has 2 generals captured on any army in 10 minutes apart. So the generals were captured. So again, we want to, I know this is going to be on YouTube, you can read the whole account of what happened. This is a fictional description of how Alexander was talking about what he did, but this is a description of how they got the guns. So it's a nighttime battle, they're fighting in the smoke and the fog, and these photographs are, on top are photographs from reenactments, and it looks crisp and clean and tidy and organized. This illustration is more like the chaos that's really happening. It's not a clean, tidy, everyone lines up, the uniform isn't messy. It's a horrible situation. Everywhere there's light, it's either it's fire from a musket or a cannon, and the sounds of men screaming and horses screaming are filling the air. And so when the Gage family are let out the next morning, their farm has been decimated, and there's a lot of wounded men and some dead men from both sides all around the properties. So that's the reality of the war. And I have a good friend, Elizabeth Tessier, who shared poetry, and we did a project a couple years ago where I did the prose, I would set up the situation, and she would have a poem of it. And so we're going to get to a poem. So what is more fearful than being shot is being stabbed. A sword slash is two-sided. If you get a cut from a knife, broken glass, or a sword, it is possible to get stitched up, but if you've been bayoneted, bayonets have 3 sides. So you have a 3-sided hole in you, and if you push on a cut with 2 sides, you can hold it together until a bandage gets on it, hold it together, you can sew it up. If you have a 3-sided cut, you can sew up side 1, you can sew up side 2, but if you sew up side 3, side 1 rips open again. It is impossible in 1812 to sew up a 3-sided cut. So if you're bayoneted, you are going to die. There's no chance of rescue. And so this is why we get to the why I talk now, the field of battles and home. So this is one of 2 poems I'm inserting in the talk. So this is she wrote this poem from James Gage's point of view. That night I understood for the first time the agony that was my father's death. He died in the battle fighting alongside some of those I now call enemies. The terror in the bodies of both sides, confusion, fear, and panic on the field. And now the field of battle was my home. My brood inside the apex there. I would not let war take my eldest son. It took all my reach of fatherhood to hold him to his promise not to go. Without me, neither my son would have grown old. But as the battle waned, the moans, smoke, and fleeing troops gave pause. We lay low until the break of day. He came with me to see the damage done. Then Mary flew to me from the front porch, with news that all my loves were safe and sound. So Asahel and I took an oxen cart around to gather up those fallen and wounded. Our home then became a hospital for the broken children of other men. These are the official losses. On the British side, 23 were killed, American 17, 136 wounded. That doesn't mean some of them will not die from wounds. British, so you see, the British suffered more, and then also missing. So they may have mentioned what officially the was done, that they were missing. Now the cost of war, everyone put in claims to the government for what happened to them. And so James Gage had a story. This is a photograph of the store at the turn of the century. It was in Convention Farm now. And this photograph of the Gage household, you can see the store and also a barn too. But James put in a claim, 2 claims. So for the claims to the American government, he's got 11 acres of meadow destroyed by parcel oil, 100 acres of corn, 500 fence rails, 3 cats, 15 sheep. So he's putting in how much less. So he basically what he's asking for is he is owed 68 pounds and 15 shillings by what happened with the Americans on his property. But the Americans were there overnight. They arrived on Saturday night, and by Sunday morning they're gone. The British hung around for a while, and he put in a big claim with them. He wanted 73 pounds, 10 shillings from the British Army because they stayed, and what the Americans had eaten them, the Americans did. They stayed until, they stayed until late November. So he's saying, we were crowded in our rooms, they were sleeping in our rooms, they outputting in their barracks, they've taken everything, they've eaten everything, they've taken all my fences that my sons and I have cut and chopped up, they've burned all the fences, they've taken things out of my store. So he's asking for all our damages. So poor Mary Davis Gage, the American Army and the British Army ransacked her property when she was a teenage girl, and then after the war was over, now in 1813, the American Army and the British Army ransacked her farm again. So she's really not good at that. So this is Elizabeth's second poem. For 2 days, the Americans seized the farmhouse. 2 days, they raised my meadow and trampled the new corn. They slaughtered 26 sheep, 3 calves, and 300 pounds of flour. All told, 68 pounds, 15 shillings. Then the British came. On the 6th, they celebrated with 10 gallons of whiskey and a large hog that I was saving for winter. They stayed 54 days. 54 days, the officers had 3 rooms in my dwelling house. The soldiers stayed in the barns or on the fields. They used at least a ton of hay for bedding, and for 1,600 fence rails my sons and I had fixed in the ground, were burnt, easy driving for their fires. All told, 73 pounds and shillings. So many years of work. 54 days my family, my mother, wife, and 8 children, tended wounded men, ripped bed sheets for the wounded. The men left just as winter took hold. You cannot imagine the cold if you have not been there. But imagine this, 54 days sharing one room. 54 days of watching all you had built, stored, saved for, eaten away. Your blood-soaked fields bare of fences, and winter on its way. So in 1835, James became very prosperous, and they sold the house, and a second floor is added by the new owner, and this 3-level 1789 root cellar, 1796 main floor, 1835 second floor, it looks a lot like Harmony Hall, doesn't it? That's just after style, it was very popular. So they sold the house, and James and Mary, these are the actual paintings of them, and James, when you hire a painter to create an image of anyone in your family, there are set fees. First, you must choose the size of the canvas that you're painting. That's a cost. How big is it going to be? Then you pay for details. For the lowest fee, you will get an image of yourself from just the shoulders up. And so you see in the face and a bit of your clothing. The next level of fee, it's the waist up. And if it's the waist up, your hands are on display. I wish the light was better. Mary can't see, but Mary's holding the Bible, so she's making 2 statements. She's saying, I am literate, I can read and write. And she's also saying, I am very devout. James is holding a miniature of his father, so he's saying, I am proud to be of the Gage line. So the next level of fee, it's from the knees up, so it's a 3/4 portrait showing a lot of detail of clothing, and of course the most expensive fee is head to toe, you can even see the shoes or boots they're wearing. And if you have paid for a head to toe painting, people might remark, well, that certainly costs an arm and a leg. That's where that expression comes from. If it cost you an arm and a leg, it was very expensive. So if you paid for all those details, you paid for something very expensive. So James moving to Hamilton. The Lower Bank was established in 1835, and there's a James P. Gage, but there's also James Gage. So James Gage down the board next to the Lower Bank. He's living in a fine brick home downtown. And by the way, as he bought land and acquired things, his lawyer was Allan McNabb, who later becomes Sir Allan McNabb. So McNabb was James Gage's lawyer for all his land tax actions, not only in Hamilton, Stoney Creek, but also in what is Wellington Square, which was Burlington. So anything that the Gages owned, their lawyer was McNabb. Now, when they sold the house, James's mother was 91 years old. So they sold the house in Hamilton, and she lived for another 6 years in Hamilton. But I can imagine, living that long and all those memories and being able to move. I don't know if she liked the new place or not, but she did not lose her teeth on it. And when the Gages moved, they lived at 52 John Street Upper. So the streets went right to the base of the escarpment. If it was above King Street, it was considered upper, and below Street was just a street name. So there's John Street was anything below King, and John Street Upper was below. And the intersection was Peel Street, which is now Hunter Street. So basically, where they lived is the intersection. That's basically where the GO station is now. So their house is no longer there, but their house would have been in the area of the GO station. So this is from that 1853 street directory. Hamilton showing that Peel Street intersects John, and then number 52, James Gage. This is a painting that hangs in the parlor. It is not something that Gage has actually owned. It was chosen as a period appropriate, but it's interesting that the clock that's in the parlor, you can always see this beautiful face of the clock, and it actually has the 4 seasons. But inside the clock is a pendulum, and that's the pendulum. Is a painting of the ship. And you never get to see that because, of course, it's always closed. So there, you guys have a sneak preview of something you don't get to look at unless you work there. Now, other tragedies happened when Keziah Gage was 25 years old. Cholera swept the city. Her husband survived, but Keziah and her daughter, Mary Keziah, and her little boy, George, contracted cholera. And they were, like everyone died of cholera, they were buried in mass graves because people were dying that fast. And their daughter Mary, the one who was only 1 year old about that, she's buried at sea. She was on a trip to England and died suddenly, and they buried her at sea. So for James and Mary, 2 of their children, they could never have a grave to go pay respects to. So a monument. This is Sarah Calder. Her mother Anne will not be born until years after the battle, but Sarah grew up fascinated with stories, and she would constantly talk to her aunts and uncles and her grandparents about what happened. And she wanted, Gage land is not done, it's been sold out, but in the 1890s, the land was for sale, and there was the men of the Wentworth Historical Society, she said, the farm is for sale. It's not as much as there used to be, but we should buy this, and we can have something that honors the Battle of Stoney Creek and the British victories. And they're like, no, we're just going to build a monument. And she was not impressed. She didn't think it was much of a monument. So she formed the Women's Wentworth Historical Society, and they had big sales and displays, and they raised enough money to buy the land and buy the house back to become a museum. And then she decided that she wanted to have a better monument than the one the men came up with. And so she wrote the government Ottawa and said, I need $5,000. I thought our tax plan's already, and I need $5,000. So just so you know, I'm going to keep writing you until you give me $5,000. And they got letters twice a week for a few months, and they're like, she's never going to stop. Let's just give her the $5,000. So her motto was, it can be done, it must be done. No, it should be done, it can be done, it must be done. So she is the reason that the monument construction began, and it was opened up on June the 6th, 1913, to commemorate 100 years of peace between Canada and the States. And on the day of the opening, Queen Mary opened up the monument. Queen Mary never left England. They had a telegraph in the Royal Palace and a prearranged time with the time difference. Supposedly the Queen was the one who pressed the button. She pressed the button and telegraph goes across England, across the Atlantic Ocean, across Canada, all the way to Stoney Creek at prearranged time. The bunting covered up part of the monument, all fell down. Queen Mary officially opened up the monument, even though she never saw it for real. And she sent photographs, and apparently there's this huge room in Buckingham Palace filled with gifts from all monarchs from all the countries over the years. And somewhere in that giant pile of gifts is pictures and commemorative things about the monument being opened up. And we now have a new monument, new markers over too. We have Eagles Among Us, which commemorate Indigenous history, and the 4 colors of granite represent the 4 colors of the medicine wheel. And the last thing, and then I'm done promise you. Well, later, shut up. The number one question they got asked was, is Gage Park related to the Gage family? And the answer is yes. So, remember William and Susanna? The brother and sister married? So, William and Susanna had, not as many as you, but their second born son is Andrew. Andrew, with his second wife, his wives keep dying from having children, had a child named John. John, with his wife Hannah, has Robert. Robert, who unfortunately marries his first cousin, Hannah Jane. And they have a daughter, but it's Robert and Hannah who have the land that is now Gage Park. And they have one daughter, Eugenie. And so the Children's Museum in Gage Park is originally the home of Robert and Hannah. So they're James Gage's cousins, basically. So there's photographs of Robert and his wife and their daughter Eugenie, and so they are Gages, but they connect to William Gage's wife Susanna. So if you go back to the start of it, they are related, but they're not directly related. It's not any of James and Mary's children or their children. It's their cousins who live across the road. And finishing off, this is the second last slide, because I'm really famous for telling dad jokes. Here's the very last thing. It's a really terrible pun. I apologize in advance. You have to when you're reading it, imagine James' voice is very whiny. I'll read it. I don't feel like making butter today, James, so you do it. But Mary, it's your turn. I apologize again.